Hello and welcome to the next lesson. Now that we have both RStudio and Git set up on your computer and a GitHub account, it's time to link them together so that you can maximize the benefits of using RStudio in your version control pipelines. First, we will link RStudio and Git, and then we will link RStudio and GitHub. We will also link an existing project with Git and GitHub. Let's start with linking RStudio and Git. In RStudio, go to Tools and then select Global Options. When new screen will show, select Git or SVN. Sometimes the default path to the Git executable is not correct. Confirm that git.exe resides in the directory that RStudio has specified. If not, change the directory to the correct path. Otherwise, click OK or Apply. RStudio and Git are now linked. Now let's link RStudio and GitHub. In that same RStudio option window, click Create RSA key, and when this completes, click Close. Following this, in that same window again, click View Public Key and copy the string of numbers and letters. Close this window now. You have now created a key that is specific to you, which we will provide to GitHub so that it knows who you are when you commit a change from within RStudio. To do so, go to github.com, log in if you are not already, and go to your account settings. There go to SSH or GPG keys and click New SSH key. Paste in the public key you have copied from RStudio into the key box and give it a title related to RStudio. Confirm the addition of the key with your GitHub password. GitHub and RStudio are now linked. From here we can create a repository on GitHub and link to RStudio. On GitHub, create a new repository. From your profile to repositories to the new repository, name your new test repository and give it a short description. Click Create Repository, copy the URL from the new repository now. In RStudio, go to the File, click New Project, select Version Control, select Git as your version control software, paste in the repository URL from before, select the location where you would like the project stored. When done, click on Create Project. Doing so will initialize a new project linked to the GitHub repository and open a new session of RStudio. Now create a new R script. Go to the File menu and then New File and then R script and copy and paste the following code, which is two print functions with the text of this file was created within RStudio and now it lives on GitHub. Save the file. Note that when you do so, the default location for the file is within the new project directory you created earlier. Once that is done, looking back at RStudio, in the Git tab of the environment quadrant, you should see your file you just created. Click the checkbox under Staged to stage your file. Click Commit. A new window should open that lists all of the changed files from earlier, and below that shows the differences in the staged files from previous versions. In the upper quadrant, in the commit message box, write yourself a commit message, click commit and then close the window. So far, you have created a file, saved it, staged it and committed it. If you remember your version control lecture, the next step is to push your changes to your online repository. Push your changes to the GitHub repository. Go to your GitHub repository and see that the commit has been recorded. You have just successfully pushed your first commit from within RStudio to GitHub. Till now we linked RStudio with Git and GitHub. In doing this, we created a repository on GitHub and linked it to the RStudio. Sometimes, however, you may already have an R project that is not yet under version control or linked with GitHub. Let's fix that. So, what if you already have an R project that you have been working on but don't have it linked up to any version control software? Thankfully, RStudio and GitHub recognize this can happen and have steps in place to help you. Admittedly, this is slightly more troublesome to do than just creating a repository on GitHub and linking it with RStudio before starting the project. So first, let's set up a situation where we have a local project that is not under version control. Go to the File menu, then select New Project and then select New Directory and then select New Project and name your project. Since we are trying to emulate a time where you have a project not currently under version control, do not click Create a Git repository, click Create Project. We have now created an R project that is not currently under version control. Let's fix that. First, let's set it up to interact with Git. Open Git bash or terminal and navigate to the directory containing your project files. Move around directories by typing cd command with directory name of path to file. When the command prompt in the line before the $sign says the correct directory location of your project, you are in the correct location. Once here, type git init followed by git add. This initializes this directory as a Git repository and adds all of the files in the directory to your local repository. Commit these changes to the Git repository using git commit -m initial commit. So at this point we have created an R project and have now linked it to the Git version control. The next step is to link this with GitHub. To do this, go to github.com and again create a new repository. Make sure the name is the exact same as your R project. Do not initialize a readme file or git ignore or license. Upon creating the repository, you should see a page like this. You should see that there is an option to push an existing repository from the command line with the instructions below containing code on how to do so. In Git bash or terminal, copy and paste these lines of code to link your repository with GitHub. After doing so, refresh your GitHub page and it should now look something like the image on the slide. When you reopen your project in RStudio, you should now have access to the Git tab in the upper right quadrant and can push to GitHub from within RStudio any future changes. If there is an existing project that others are working on that you are asked to contribute to, you can link the existing project with your RStudio. It follows the exact same premise where you created a GitHub repository and then cloned it to your computer using RStudio. In brief, in RStudio, go to the File menu and then select New Project and then select Version Control. Now select Git as your version control system and like in the last lesson, provide the URL to the repository that you are attempting to clone and select a location on your computer to store the files locally. Create the project now. All the existing files in the repository should now be stored locally on your computer and you have the ability to push edits from your RStudio interface. The only difference from the previous linking is that you did not create the original repository, instead you cloned somebody else's. So in this lesson we linked Git and RStudio so that RStudio recognizes you are using Git as your version control software. Following that, we linked RStudio to GitHub so that you can push and pull repositories from within RStudio. To test this, we created a repository on GitHub, linked it with the new project within RStudio, created a new file and then staged, committed and pushed the file to the GitHub repository. We also went over how to convert an existing project to be under Git version control using the command line. Following this, we linked your newly version control project to GitHub using a mix of GitHub commands and the command line. We then briefly recapped how to clone an existing GitHub repository to your local machine using RStudio. See you in the next lecture.